The party was in full swing at the Grand Hotel ballroom that night. Music played from the speakers, laughter filled the air, and the smell of expensive food floated around the room. Everyone there was someone important, at least that's what they liked to think. The men wore suits that cost more than some people's yearly rent, and the women sparkled in gowns covered with jewels. Every small movement, every laugh, every toast felt like a show put on for one another. In the middle of this world of luxury, there was one person who didn't belong, at least that's what they thought. She moved quietly between the tables, holding a silver tray with glasses of champagne. Her uniform was simple, black and white, and her hair tied neatly so it wouldn't fall on her face. Most guests didn't even look at her. To them, she was just part of the background. But she didn't seem to mind. She had a calmness about her, like someone who had learned to stay composed no matter what. Every now and then, when she passed the corner of the room, her eyes would land on the grand piano sitting near the stage. Its black surface reflected the lights like a mirror. Her steps slowed each time she looked at it, almost as if she wanted to touch it, but she always turned away before anyone noticed. Someone did notice, though. Near the center of the room sat a group of wealthy men talking loudly and laughing even louder. One of them, known among his friends for his arrogance, caught the waitress looking at the piano. He grinned and nudged the man next to him. "See that waitress?" he said, loud enough for the others to hear. "She keeps staring at the piano. Maybe she thinks she can play." The men laughed, the kind of laughter that made others feel small. "Maybe she can entertain us," another said. They all looked at each other with mischief in their eyes. The first man leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink. "Why not? Let's have some fun tonight." The waitress didn't hear them. She continued her work, offering drinks to a group near the stage. But a few minutes later, the arrogant man stood up, raising his glass. The music lowered, and the crowd turned to him. He smiled broadly, pretending to make a toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice confident and loud, "let's take a moment to appreciate the amazing staff working so hard tonight." A few guests clapped politely, not really knowing what he was up to. "And there's one in particular who seems very interested in our lovely piano here." He pointed toward the waitress. The room followed his gesture, and she froze, not understanding what was happening. "She's been eyeing it all night," he continued. "So how about we let her play something for us? Surely she has some hidden talent." The room filled with a mix of laughter and surprise. Some thought it was just a bit of fun, others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the mockery behind his tone. The waitress's face turned slightly pale. She didn't know what to say. The manager, standing by the wall, gave her an uncertain look. He didn't want trouble but didn't dare speak against one of the guests. "Go on," the man said again, smirking. "Just one song. We'd love to hear what you can do." For a moment, everything around her blurred. The chatter, the music, the sound of glasses clinking, it all faded. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, waiting. Her first instinct was to refuse, to quietly walk away and pretend she hadn't heard. But something inside her whispered differently. She took a slow breath and placed the tray down on the nearest table. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her eyes had a strange calm. She nodded once, just enough to show she accepted. The crowd murmured, some curious, some amused. She walked toward the piano, each step echoing softly on the marble floor. Her shoes clicked lightly, and the sound seemed to fill the silence left behind. As she reached the piano, she paused for a moment, almost afraid to touch it. The instrument was beautiful, its polished surface gleaming under the chandelier lights. It had been years since she had sat in front of one. Memories rushed through her, long hours of practice, the sound of her teacher's voice, the feel of the keys beneath her fingers. Life had changed so much since then. Back then, she had a dream. Now she was serving drinks to people who wouldn't remember her name by morning. The arrogant man crossed his arms and called out, "Don't be shy, we're waiting." His friends chuckled again. The waitress sat down slowly on the piano bench. Her back was straight, her hands resting gently on her lap. She closed her eyes for a moment and a deep breath left her lips. The air in the room felt heavier now. The crowd had grown quiet, maybe expecting her to embarrass herself. Some whispered that she probably didn't even know how to play. Others leaned forward, curious. She lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. They were cool to the touch. For a second, she hesitated. Then, without a word, she pressed the first note. A soft sound floated into the air, delicate but clear. She followed it with another and another. The melody began to take shape, simple at first, then deeper, fuller. The crowd's whispers faded as the music grew stronger. Her fingers moved with confidence, tracing paths across the keys like someone remembering a forgotten language. Every sound seemed to carry a story, one of loss, hope, and strength. The noise of the party, the clinking glasses, even the breathing of the people around her seemed to vanish. The music wrapped around them all. Her eyes stayed closed. Her expression calm but filled with something raw, something real. Each note she played seemed to come straight from her heart. The melody rose and fell, soft one moment, powerful the next. Even those who had laughed earlier found themselves silent, watching her in awe. The arrogant man's smirk faded as the music continued. He hadn't expected this. None of them had. What was meant to be a cruel joke had turned into something else entirely. The room, once noisy and proud, now stood still. The sound of the piano filled every corner, every heart. Some guests exchanged glances, not daring to speak. Others simply listened, their expressions softening as they felt something stir within them, something they hadn't felt in years. She played like time didn't exist, like the rest of the world had disappeared. When she finally touched the last note, it lingered in the air for a moment before fading into silence. The room stayed completely still. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Then slowly a few people began to clap. The applause grew louder, spreading until the entire room was filled with it. The waitress opened her eyes, blinking as if waking from a dream. She looked down at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, then quietly stood up. Her heart was beating fast, but her face remained calm. She didn't smile, didn't bow. She simply gave a small nod and turned to walk away. The crowd's applause followed her. Even the man who had mocked her earlier looked lost for words. He tried to force a laugh but stopped when he saw the looks from others around him. People were whispering, not with mockery this time, but with admiration. Some even asked who she was, amazed that someone so talented was working as a waitress. She picked up her tray again, her movements steady and graceful. A few guests stopped her to thank her or compliment her performance. She only smiled politely, saying little. Inside, though, her heart was warm. It had been so long since she had touched a piano, so long since she had let herself remember what it felt like to play. For a brief moment, she was no longer invisible. She wasn't the quiet girl carrying drinks. She was someone with a voice again, someone who could move hearts without saying a word. As she passed the arrogant man's table, he avoided her eyes. The smirk was gone, replaced by something else. Shame, maybe even respect. He mumbled something, but she didn't stop to listen. She just kept walking, her posture tall, her steps light. The night continued, but it felt different now. The guests talked softly, still thinking about the unexpected music that had touched them. And in the corner, the piano stood silent once more, its keys resting after telling a story that no one in that room would forget. The waitress returned to her duties as if nothing had happened, but deep inside, something had changed. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not for her uniform or her job, but for the part of her that she thought she had lost long ago. And even though she knew tomorrow would bring another long day of work, she carried that quiet moment with her. The night she played again, not for fame or praise, but simply because she could. The night after the party, the hotel was quieter than usual. The staff moved slowly, cleaning up what was left from the celebration. The once grand ballroom was now filled with empty glasses, wrinkled tablecloths, and the faint smell of perfume and wine. The waitress worked silently, collecting plates and folding napkins. She looked tired, but her mind wasn't in the room. It was still caught in the music she had played the night before. Every now and then she would pause, remembering the feeling of the piano keys under her fingers and the stunned faces of the guests as they listened. She had not planned to play that night. In fact, she hadn't played in years. Life had taken her far away from music, but when she sat at that piano, it felt as though something deep inside her had finally woken up. The sound had come naturally, as if her hands remembered even when her mind had forgotten. Now, as she worked, she could still hear the echo of those notes. She smiled to herself softly, then caught the attention of her manager calling her name. "You played beautifully," he said quietly, almost as if he didn't want the walls to hear. "Everyone's still talking about it." She looked surprised. "They are," he nodded. "The guests from last night left compliments at the front desk. Some even asked who you were, and one of them, he left this." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small folded piece of paper. Inside was a note written in neat handwriting. It said, "You have a rare gift. Don't waste it." There was also a card from a local music academy with a number written at the bottom. She held the card for a long moment, her fingers trembling slightly. A gift? She had once dreamed of studying music at a place like that. But that was another life, a life before her father's illness, before she had to leave school and take whatever job she could find. "I can't afford this," she said softly, handing the card back. The manager shook his head. "Keep it," he said. "You never know what tomorrow brings." The next few days passed quietly. She went back to her routine, serving tables, polishing glasses, helping in the kitchen. But something inside her had changed. Every time she passed the piano, she found herself slowing down, sometimes even running her fingers lightly across the keys when no one was watching. It wasn't about showing off or trying to prove anything. It was about feeling alive again, about remembering who she once was. Word about her performance spread faster than she expected. One afternoon, while setting up the dining area, she overheard two hotel guests talking. "She was amazing," one said. "I was there that night. Everyone thought it was a joke at first, but then, wow." The other replied, "Someone told me she used to play in competitions when she was younger." The waitress pretended not to hear, her cheeks warming slightly. She wasn't used to people talking about her, especially not like that. Later that week, the same group of rich guests came back for another event. The arrogant man who had mocked her that night was among them. When she saw him, her stomach tightened, unsure of what to expect. He noticed her too and froze for a second before looking away. During the evening, he seemed quieter, avoiding his usual loud jokes. When she came by his table to pour drinks, he looked at her and said softly, "You played beautifully last time." His tone was sincere, different from before. She nodded politely, unsure how to respond. "Thank you," she said, keeping her voice calm. Then she moved on to the next table. But inside she felt something shift, a strange mix of forgiveness and closure. Sometimes people only change when they are made to see themselves clearly, and that night had done that for him. As the evening went on, one of the older guests approached her. He was kind-faced, with silver hair and a calm voice. "Excuse me," he said. "You're the young lady who played the piano the other night, aren't you?" She nodded, a bit nervous. He smiled warmly. "I was hoping you'd come by the music hall this weekend. My son teaches there and he'd love to meet you. Do you have something special?" He handed her another card before walking away. She stood there holding it, unsure what to feel. It wasn't the first time someone had told her she had talent, but hearing it again after so many years felt almost unreal. That night after work, she sat alone in the empty ballroom. The lights were dim, the tables cleared, and the piano stood silently in its corner. She walked over and sat down. Her fingers hesitated over the keys, then began to play softly. The melody was gentle, like a quiet conversation with herself. The notes drifted through the empty room, filling the silence. She closed her eyes, and for a few moments she wasn't a waitress, she was a pianist again. When she finished, she felt tears in her eyes. They weren't sad tears, but tears of release. The music reminded her that her dreams weren't gone, just buried. Maybe it wasn't too late to start again. The next morning, she decided to visit the music hall. It was a small building tucked between busy streets with posters of concerts and classes on the walls. She hesitated before walking in, her uniform neatly pressed but her heart racing. Inside, she met the man she had been told about, the teacher. He welcomed her kindly and asked her to play something. Her hands trembled at first, but as she began, the fear melted away. The melody flowed out of her naturally. When she stopped, the teacher smiled. "You have raw talent," he said. "But more than that, you have emotion. That's what moves people." He offered her a chance to join their evening program free of cost. "Someone has already covered your fee," he said, handing her a form. She blinked in surprise. "Who?" He only smiled and said, "Let's just say someone who saw you play believes in you." That evening, she walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, her heart full. She didn't know who had helped her, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, she had a reason to look forward to something. She spent her nights practicing at the hotel piano after her shifts, careful not to disturb anyone. Sometimes the night guard would stand near the door and listen quietly. He would smile and say, "You make the nights feel less lonely." Weeks passed and her playing improved. The teacher introduced her to other musicians, and soon she was invited to perform at a small community event. It wasn't a grand ballroom or a big stage, but it felt right. She wore a simple dress borrowed from a friend, and when she sat at the piano, she felt the same calm she had felt that night at the hotel. As she played, she noticed familiar faces in the crowd, the manager, a few co-workers, and even the arrogant guest who had mocked her before. He clapped the loudest when she finished, his eyes filled with genuine admiration. After the performance, people came up to her to thank her, to tell her how her music made them feel. Some said it reminded them of lost dreams. Others said it gave them hope. She listened quietly, humbled by their words. It was strange, she thought, how one small moment of humiliation had turned into something beautiful. The world had tried to make her feel small, but instead, she had found her voice again. Later that night, as she walked home, she thought about her father and how proud he would have been. She remembered the evenings when he would sit beside her during practice, his eyes full of pride. Life hadn't been kind, but music had always been her safe place, the one thing that couldn't be taken away. By the time she reached her small apartment, the sky was beginning to brighten. She sat by the window watching the sunrise. The city slowly came to life around her, but inside her heart, a quiet peace settled. She knew she still had a long way to go, many challenges ahead, but now she wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced humiliation and turned it into a beginning. She had found herself again. That morning, as she got ready for another long shift at the hotel, she placed the card from the music academy carefully inside her bag. It was a reminder that no matter where she worked or what uniform she wore, she carried something no one could take from her: her music, her strength, and her story. The months that followed brought quiet but steady changes in her life. She still worked long hours at the hotel, carrying trays and clearing tables, but every evening after her shift ended, she sat at the piano in the empty ballroom and practiced. Sometimes the night guard would stay behind to listen. Sometimes she was alone and her music became her only company. She didn't play for applause or attention anymore. She played because it healed her. Each note she touched carried a part of her story, and slowly she started to feel whole again. At the music academy, her evenings were filled with lessons and rehearsals. The teacher who had offered her the scholarship treated her with respect and patience. He saw something special in her, something that couldn't be taught, only felt. "You don't play the piano," he once told her after class. "You speak through it." His words stayed with her. For the first time in years, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could build a future out of her gift. Her co-workers at the hotel noticed the difference too. She smiled more, walked lighter, and carried herself with quiet confidence. One of them, a kind older woman who worked in the kitchen, said, "You've changed. There's light in your eyes now." The waitress laughed softly. "I think I found a part of myself I'd forgotten," she replied. But life, as it often does, still tested her. The hotel manager called her into the office one morning. "We're short on staff for an upcoming charity gala," he said. "It's going to be a big event. Important people, press, donors. I want you on the main floor again." She nodded, not realizing yet what that night would bring. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom was decorated even more beautifully than before, with golden lights, crystal chandeliers, and fresh flowers on every table. The air buzzed with conversation and laughter. She moved between the guests, calm and steady as always. But this time, when she looked at the piano in the corner, she didn't feel fear or sadness, only warmth. It was her friend now, her safe place. As the night went on, she recognized a few familiar faces among the crowd. Some were the same guests from the night she had first played. They smiled at her when their eyes met, and she returned the gesture politely. Near the front of the room sat the arrogant man who had once tried to humiliate her. He looked different now, quieter, more thoughtful. When their eyes met, he gave a small nod, almost like an apology without words. Toward the end of the evening, the host of the event took the stage to thank everyone for their generosity. Then he announced a short musical performance before dinner was served. "We're honored tonight," he said with a smile, "to have a young pianist whose talent speaks from the heart." The waitress froze for a moment. She hadn't been told there would be a performance, let alone that she was the one who would play. The host motioned toward her with a warm smile. "Please, everyone, welcome her." The crowd began to applaud. Her heart pounded in her chest. She looked toward the manager, who gave her an encouraging nod. "They asked for you," he whispered. She took a deep breath, wiped her palms on her apron, and slowly walked toward the piano. The applause faded into silence as she sat down. The lights dimmed slightly and a soft spotlight fell on her. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the first time she had sat here, trembling, scared, and humiliated. This time was different. She wasn't being forced, she was being invited. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The music that filled the room was gentle at first, like a whisper. Then it grew, layer by layer, into something rich and powerful. The melody carried emotion, pain, strength, and hope intertwined. People stopped talking, stopped eating, stopped everything. The only sound was the piano. Some guests leaned forward, caught by the emotion in every note. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. As she played, her mind wandered through memories, the nights of struggle, the loneliness, the small kindnesses that kept her going. She thought of her father, of the tiny apartment she went home to every night, of the people who had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. Each thought found its way into the music. Her fingers moved faster. Her body swayed gently with the rhythm. She wasn't performing anymore. She was telling her story. When the final note rang out, the room stayed silent. It was as if time had stopped. Then slowly the applause began, soft at first, then louder and louder until it filled the hall. People stood up, cheering. She looked around, her face glowing but calm. She didn't bow or smile too widely. She just nodded once humbly before stepping away from the piano. The host approached her, shaking her hand. "That was incredible," he said sincerely. "You moved everyone here." She thanked him softly and stepped aside, her heart still racing. The arrogant man came forward too. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I was wrong about you. That night, I thought it would be funny to embarrass you, but you taught me something I won't forget." She looked at him, then smiled gently. "Sometimes life has strange ways of teaching us lessons," she said. He nodded, speechless. Later that night, as she was helping the staff clean up, several guests approached her to thank her again. One of them, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, said, "Your music, it touched my heart. My daughter used to play before she got sick. Listening to you tonight reminded me of her. Thank you." Tears filled the woman's eyes as she hugged the waitress. In that moment, she realized something powerful. Music didn't just heal her. It healed others too. The next day, she received a call from the music academy. They told her that someone from the gala wanted to sponsor her full-time education there. It meant she could finally stop working night shifts and focus completely on her music. She couldn't believe it. She sat on her bed holding the phone, tears running down her cheeks. It was more than she had ever dreamed. At first, she hesitated to accept. The job at the hotel had been her safety net. It was what kept her grounded when everything else felt uncertain. But her manager, who had watched her grow from a quiet waitress to a confident young musician, encouraged her. "Go," he said. "You were meant for something greater. The hotel will always be here, but this chance may not." So she took it. Her last night at the hotel was emotional. Her co-workers hugged her, some with tears in their eyes. "We'll miss you," they said, "but we're proud of you." She smiled and promised to visit. Before leaving, she went to the ballroom one last time. The piano stood quietly in the corner. She ran her hand across the keys, whispering, "Thank you," as if it could hear her. Her new life wasn't easy. The academy demanded hours of practice and discipline. There were moments she doubted herself, moments when exhaustion and fear crept in. But every time she sat at the piano, she remembered where she had started. The girl who once served drinks in silence was now performing for audiences that truly listened. Each challenge only made her stronger. Months later, she was invited to play at a public concert arranged by the Academy. It was her first time performing on a real stage since her childhood. As she stood backstage, she felt the same nervousness she had felt that first night at the hotel, but this time it came with excitement. When she walked onto the stage, the lights were bright, and the audience quieted immediately. She sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and began. The piece she chose to play was one she had written herself, a melody inspired by her journey. It started softly, like uncertainty, then grew bolder, filled with emotion and strength. When the final note faded, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, but what moved her most was the sight of her manager standing in the crowd, clapping proudly. She hadn't expected him to come, but there he was, smiling like a proud father. That night, as she walked off the stage, she realized something she would never forget. Sometimes life leads you through pain not to break you, but to show you who you are. Her story had started in a place of humiliation, but it had led her to a place of purpose. And as long as she had her music, she knew she would never truly be alone. Her journey at the Music Academy became both the hardest and most beautiful chapter of her life. Each morning began with long hours of practice, followed by theory lessons and rehearsals. Her fingers ached, her mind grew tired, but her heart never complained. Every note she played carried the weight of her dreams. Sometimes she stayed late after class, sitting alone in the empty practice room, replaying the melodies she had once played in the quiet hotel ballroom. The memories reminded her how far she had come, but also how fragile the path ahead still was. The teachers admired her dedication. She didn't have the advantages many of the other students had. Some came from wealthy families with private tutors and grand pianos in their homes. She, on the other hand, worked part-time at a small cafe nearby to cover her living expenses. But what she lacked in luxury, she made up for in heart. Her music carried emotion in every sound, something that couldn't be taught. One afternoon, the Academy director called her into his office. He was a kind man who rarely smiled, but that day there was a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. "You've been selected," he said, handing her a letter. She looked at it, confused. "For what?" she asked. "For the national competition," he said proudly. "Only a handful of students are chosen every year. It's a chance to perform in front of judges, professionals, and even potential sponsors. This could change everything for you." Her hands shook slightly as she held the letter. She could hardly believe it. "Thank you," she whispered. The director nodded. "You earned it. But remember, this is only the beginning." The weeks leading up to the competition were intense. She practiced day and night, refining every detail of her piece. There were moments of frustration when the notes didn't sound right or her timing slipped, but she never gave up. She would close her eyes and remember why she was doing this. Not for fame, not for money, but because playing made her feel alive. The day of the competition arrived faster than she expected. The concert hall was larger than anything she had seen before. Backstage, the air buzzed with tension as young musicians tuned instruments, whispered nervously, or sat in silence trying to calm their thoughts. She sat in the corner, her hands resting on her lap, her heart beating faster than usual. She thought about her father, about the people who had supported her, about the first night she had been made to play at the hotel. That night, humiliation had turned into something powerful. It had started her journey, and now she was here because of it. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage slowly. The lights were bright, and for a moment she couldn't see the audience, only the grand piano waiting for her. She took a deep breath, sat down, and placed her hands on the keys. The first note echoed through the hall, soft, tender, and full of emotion. Then the melody began to grow. Her fingers moved with grace, her heart guiding every movement. The music told her story, from pain to hope, from loss to strength. As she played, the noise in her head disappeared. The hall seemed to melt away, leaving only her and the sound. Every note she struck seemed to pull the audience deeper into her world. When she reached the final passage, her body trembled with emotion. But she didn't stop until the last note faded into silence. The hall stayed still for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Some even shouted her name. Tears filled her eyes as she bowed slightly, overwhelmed. After the performance, several judges came to speak with her. One of them, an older woman with kind eyes, said, "You have something rare, truth in your playing. Don't lose that." She thanked them humbly, her voice barely steady. Later, as the results were announced, she didn't even care about the ranking. All she cared about was that she had played with honesty, from her heart. To her surprise, she won second place. It wasn't the top spot, but it was enough to open doors she never thought possible. A representative from a small music foundation approached her afterward. "We'd like to support your next step," he said. "We can help you record your first album." Her heart nearly stopped. The months that followed were a whirlwind. She spent her days recording in a small studio, writing new compositions and performing at local concerts. Her music began to reach more people. Listeners described it as honest, healing, and emotional. Some said it made them cry, others said it gave them peace. Each message she received reminded her why she started. Fame didn't matter. Connection did. One evening, she received an invitation to perform at a charity event, the same hotel ballroom where her story had begun. Her chest tightened as she read the letter. Returning to that place felt strange, like walking into an old memory. But she knew she had to go. This time she wouldn't be serving drinks. She would be performing as a guest artist. When the night arrived, she stood backstage, watching guests arrive in their elegant clothes. The chandeliers sparkled, the laughter sounded familiar. She felt a mix of nerves and nostalgia. Then she saw him, the same man who had once made her play to mock her. He looked different now, older, calmer. When their eyes met, he smiled gently and gave a small bow of respect. She nodded back, no anger left in her heart. The host introduced her with pride. "Tonight we are honored to have a special performance by someone whose story reminds us of humility, grace, and the power of second chances." She walked onto the stage, her heart steady. The same piano stood there, shining under the lights. She sat down and began to play. This time her music was not just for herself. It was for everyone in that room. The people who had once ignored her, the ones who had supported her, and even the ones who had doubted her. The melody rose and fell like waves, filling the ballroom with emotion. Guests who had been laughing moments ago now sat in silence, some with tears in their eyes. Even the arrogant man bowed his head, lost in the sound. When the performance ended, the applause was thunderous. But what touched her most was not the clapping. It was the faces she saw. They weren't just impressed. They were moved. People had been reminded of something real that money or power could never buy. After the performance, she was surrounded by guests wanting to speak to her. One of them, the event organizer, said, "Your music has a way of reaching people's hearts. You've inspired us all tonight." She smiled softly and said, "Music has always been my way of speaking when words fall short." Later, she slipped away to the quiet corner of the ballroom. She looked at the piano and gently touched its keys one last time. "You changed my life," she whispered, smiling. It felt like she was saying goodbye to an old friend. Before leaving, the arrogant man approached her. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "Not just for the music, but for forgiving me without ever saying it. That night I learned something about myself. I'll never forget it." She nodded, her eyes kind. "Sometimes we all need a moment that humbles us," she replied. He smiled faintly, then walked away. Outside, the night air was cool and calm. She looked up at the stars and took a deep breath. It felt like the end of one story and the beginning of another. She thought of all the moments that had led her here. The humiliation, the loneliness, the kindness of strangers, the rediscovery of her purpose. Life had not been easy, but it had been real. As she walked home, she passed by the cafe where she used to work and smiled. The journey had come full circle. She realized that no matter where she played or how far she went, she would always carry the memory of that night in the hotel ballroom, the night that changed everything. And somewhere deep inside, she knew her story wasn't over yet. There were still new songs waiting to be written, and she was ready to play them. The days after her performance at the hotel felt like a gentle dream she didn't want to wake up from. Messages poured in from people who had seen the video of her playing that night. Someone from the event had recorded it and shared it online. Within days, it spread across social media. People from all over the world left comments saying how her music made them feel something deep inside, something real. She was surprised, not because people liked her performance, but because they connected with the story behind it. Despite the sudden attention, she stayed humble. Her life still felt simple. She woke up early, made her tea, and walked to the studio every morning. Fame didn't change her. If anything, it made her more aware of how precious her journey had been. She had gone from a waitress who played piano at night to someone whose story touched hearts across the world. But she knew her purpose wasn't to chase fame. It was to keep sharing what music meant to her. One morning, she received an email from a famous orchestra in another country. They had seen her video and wanted to invite her as a guest pianist for their upcoming concert series. She couldn't believe her eyes. Her hands trembled as she read the message over and over again. She replied with a simple, heartfelt yes. This was something she had only dreamed of, performing on a grand stage with an orchestra behind her. The next few weeks were filled with preparation. She practiced tirelessly, learning the pieces she would perform with the orchestra. There were times when she doubted herself, wondering if she was truly ready for something so big. But every time those thoughts appeared, she reminded herself of where she came from. She remembered the small hotel, the piano that had once been her only friend, and the moment when her humiliation had turned into strength. Those memories gave her courage. When she arrived in the new city, everything felt different yet strangely familiar. The air was colder, the streets wider, and the people spoke in a language she barely understood. But when she walked into the concert hall for rehearsal, the sound of the piano made her feel at home. Music had no language, it spoke directly to the soul. The conductor of the orchestra welcomed her warmly. He had a gentle presence and treated her with respect, something she deeply appreciated. "We've all seen your story," he said. "You remind us why we fell in love with music in the first place." His words touched her heart. During rehearsals, she played with emotion and precision, blending her melodies with the harmony of the orchestra. Every time the music swelled, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. On the night of the concert, the hall was filled with people. The audience waited in silence as the lights dimmed and the orchestra began to play. When it was her turn to walk on stage, the applause was warm and sincere. She took a deep breath, sat down at the piano, and closed her eyes. The first note flowed like water. The orchestra followed, their sounds wrapping around her melody like a soft embrace. It was as if they were breathing together, one shared heartbeat. The piece she played told her life story without a single word. It started softly, like the quiet nights she had spent cleaning tables after work, and then grew into a storm of sound, capturing her struggles, her loneliness, and finally, her triumph. When the final note lingered in the air, the hall was completely silent. Then slowly people began to stand, clapping until their hands ached. After the concert, journalists wanted interviews, sponsors wanted partnerships, and music schools wanted her to visit. But amid all the noise, she stayed grounded. She thanked everyone politely, but always found time to visit small places, music schools for children, hospitals, and shelters, where she played simple songs for those who needed them most. She often said, music should comfort, not just impress. That became her guiding thought. Months later, she decided to return home for a short break. When she arrived back in her town, she visited the small cafe where she used to work. The owner was surprised and overjoyed to see her. "You haven't changed a bit," he said with a grin. She smiled. "Maybe not on the outside," she replied softly. "But life has changed me in ways I never expected." The cafe still had that same warm smell of coffee and pastries. She sat near the window, looking at the piano in the corner. It wasn't the same one from the hotel, but it reminded her of her beginnings. The owner asked her to play a song, and she gladly agreed. The customers turned their heads as she began to play. The melody was simple, peaceful, and full of gratitude. When she finished, the whole cafe clapped, not out of surprise, but from genuine admiration. That evening, as she walked home, she passed by the hotel where her story had begun. It looked just the same. The golden lights, the doorman, the sound of distant laughter. For a moment, she stopped and watched through the glass doors. A young waitress stood inside, balancing a tray and looking tired. It reminded her of herself all those years ago. She smiled gently, whispering to herself, "Keep going. One day it will all make sense." Then she walked away, the soft night breeze brushing against her face. Over the next few years, her career grew even more. She released her album, performed around the world, and became known for the emotional depth of her playing. Yet despite all her success, she never lost touch with the real reason she started. She used her fame to raise funds for young musicians who couldn't afford lessons. giving them a chance to follow their dreams. She often told them, "Don't play for applause. Play for the soul that needs healing, even if that soul is your own." One day, a documentary filmmaker reached out to her, asking to tell her story. She agreed, not for the attention, but because she wanted people to know that even pain can lead to something beautiful if you let it. An album, her own music? She had dreamed of something like that all her life, but never dared to believe it could happen. When the documentary was released, it moved millions of people. Messages from strangers poured in, thanking her for reminding them that no dream is too small and no setback too big. Years later, when she was much older, she returned to that same hotel for another event. The ballroom had changed, it was brighter, grander, but the piano still stood in the same place. She sat down quietly, her hands trembling slightly with age, and played one of her earliest pieces. Guests gathered around, listening in awe. When she finished, she looked around and saw young faces smiling, some with tears in their eyes. She realized then that her music would live on, not just in recordings, but in the hearts of those who heard it. After the event, a young girl approached her. She looked nervous but determined. "I'm learning to play the piano too," she said shyly. "But sometimes I feel like I'm not good enough." The pianist smiled warmly and took the girl's hands in hers. "Neither did I," she replied. "But remember, every great melody starts with a single note. Don't stop playing. Someday your music will find its way into the world too." The girl smiled, her eyes shining with hope. As she walked out of the ballroom that night, the moonlight poured through the glass ceiling. She paused to take one last look at the piano. Her heart was full, not of pride but of peace. She realized that her life had come full circle. The girl who had once been forced to play to shame her had become the woman who played to inspire others. Outside, the city lights sparkled like stars. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air. The journey had been long, filled with tears, laughter, and countless melodies. And as she walked away from the hotel for the last time, she smiled, whispering softly, "Thank you, music, for giving me a voice when I had none." Her story became a quiet legend, not because she was famous, but because she showed that beauty can rise from pain, and that sometimes the most powerful songs are born from the deepest silences. Her music continued to echo wherever hearts were listening, soft, pure, and everlasting.